Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. As Christians, we are exhorted by the Scriptures to walk by faith and not by sight. But what does this really mean? Does it mean that we're supposed to blindly accept anything we are told by the religious institutions or their officers without ever questioning it or putting it to the test? Well, there have been some cults that tried to misconstrue the Scriptures that way in order to manipulate people and build power for themselves, but this is certainly not the correct interpretation of the Scripture in question. On the contrary, the very word faith, as translated from the original Greek, carries the connotation of something that is put to the test, something that's verifiably true. And yet, if walking by faith, then, is simply living our lives in accordance with principles that are verifiably true, how does that differ from walking by sight? Well, to answer that question, let's take a step back from the discussion of faith in God to faith in the laws of physics, because this will provide us with a useful illustration of the difference. Suppose we have a massive body suspended from a fixed point by a flexible element, an ideal pendulum. We know by Newton's first law of motion that an object at rest tends to stay at rest unless acted upon by unbalanced forces. And so, if our pendulum is hanging straight down, it's going to remain stationary. But, if we displace it a certain amount and let it go, now it is acted upon by unbalanced gravitational forces, and so it will begin to accelerate towards the bottom of its arc, converting some of its gravitational potential energy into kinetic energy, until it reaches the bottom of its arc, at which point it will begin to convert its kinetic energy back into potential energy. And we know, by the law of conservation of energy, that as long as we don't put any more energy into this system or take any energy out, that the sum of its potential and kinetic energy must remain the same. And so, by implication, the pendulum will never swing further than the point from which it was released. So, if you make a pendulum by taking a big rock and attaching a length of rope or chain from which it can be suspended, and then you stand back a certain distance and hold the rock up to your face and let it go, it should swing out, and then, per the laws of physics, it should swing back to ideally exactly the position from which you released it. Now, in the real world, we have things like friction and air resistance that will be acting upon the pendulum to remove a small amount of energy as long as it's in motion. And so it will actually stop a little bit short of the point from which you released it. But in any case, if you don't move, it will not hit you. It will come back to about the position that you released it from. And yet, as you see the pendulum swinging towards you, you have this gut-level, irrational reflex that makes you want to flinch and back away. Even though you know, based on your faith in the laws of physics, that if you just stand there, it's not going to hit you. Before we go any further, let's actually make a pendulum and demonstrate this. Okay, so as we've seen, when you make a pendulum out of a big rock and you hold it up to your face, let it go, and it swings out, and as it's swinging back, your faith in the laws of physics tells you, don't worry about it, just stand still, it's not going to hit you. But as you see it coming closer and closer, your sight, in essence, tells you, there's a rock coming right at your head, you better panic and run away. And so, relating this principle back to our religious faith, we know and believe that God is in control and that God works all things together for the good of His people. And so, as we look at things that are going on in our own lives or in the world around us or on the news, we see a lot of things that are potentially frightening. So, how do we respond to those things? Well, our faith would tell us, don't worry about it, stand your ground, keep doing what you know is right, and trust that God will work it all out in accordance with His perfect will. Sight, on the other hand, may well tempt us to doubt and worry and panic in these situations. And that, I think, is why the Bible exhorts us to walk by faith and not by sight in these applications. In any case, thank you for watching the Idahoan Show.